Good evening. My name is Rob Ryder, speaking out of West Cornwall, and I'm joined again with Patrick over in Andalusia. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, good evening, Rob. Hi.
Yeah, so we're back again, and what we're going to do, we've agreed to do tonight, mainly because I've got a little bit more interest in this subject because I remember the seminar. So if you're new to watching this series of conversations, Your Health in Your Hands, if you go back a few videos, you'll see the Your Health in Your Hands seminar in 4 parts. And there's some information in that I'd like to go over in a little bit more detail tonight. And so about 3 videos back, Patrick was explaining acute healing crisis. So acute healing, not acute illnesses, but acute healing. And also how eventually when you suppress, you mentioned that no wonder people in the old age, a lot of people are dying in infections because of all this mountain of waste that's been built up. So I want to revisit that tonight with a few other ideas. I'm not sure how it's going to go, but we want to revisit the acute healing crisis, the chronic illness, get a clear definition of both, and then we'll see where we'll go from there, if that sounds okay.
That's fine, yes. Of course, before we start talking about healing, and the other thing is the medical profession talks about curing diseases, which seems to be something different from healing. I think it's important to realize what we're talking about. What are we healing? What are we trying to cure, if anything? So what are diseases? Well, what we here in the West and in allopathic medicine call diseases are generally known in ancient wisdom. Various cultures come to the same conclusion and call it the same. They call it an imbalance. And the imbalance that you notice in the physical system in the body is caused by, or is the manifestation of, an imbalance in energy. That is what we call disease. They call it an imbalance in energy. So how does an imbalance occur? First of all, when we are made, and we talked about that in earlier talks, when we are made, energy is compressed, and at a certain point, it starts to become almost fixed in a point, and that is where matter starts appearing. So in general terms, you could say that matter is the fixed part of an energy field. So that energy field can't move very far. All the energies that are fixed within the matter, so also within our bodies, they've got a small range in which it can move, but it can't move beyond that, while energy without matter at its core, at its center, is free to move, and it can do all sorts of things. And what happens when we compress energy, and therefore also matter? When we compress energy, what happens? Well, energy is basically our frequencies, and frequencies are frequencies of waves. So it's a cycle, and the length of that cycle is important. The frequency is how much time there is spent for one wave cycle to be completed. So that is why they say in frequencies so many cycles per minute or per second or per whatever time scale that we're using. Now, when you compress a wave like that, the frequency doesn't change. The amplitude, how high the wave gets, doesn't change. But what changes is the amount of space that it moves through in that same period of time. That gets smaller. And that is why when we compress energy, an energy field, or energy in general, when we start compressing it, it eventually comes down to, you could almost say, one point. And so it moves up and down in that point, and then it becomes matter. It becomes a physical thing. So now our physical body is a fixed energy. It can move a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. In other words, it can open up a bit or it can close down a bit, but not very far. What they call an imbalance is actually when that energy becomes elongated or compressed. So you stretch the wave or you compress it. And when it gets out of its normality, out of its norm, so it becomes a bit, the space becomes a bit wider or a bit more narrow, that is what we call an imbalance. For any physical object, it means that when you can reach the limits to what this construction, whether it's a molecule or it's a complex thing like a human body, when you reach that limit and you want to go beyond there, or you press it beyond there, then the physical matter will just fall apart. It will disintegrate because the harmony of all the waves inside that field, and therefore also inside the matter, that harmony is so disturbed that it can no longer hold it together. So an imbalance in energy manifests in an imbalance in the physicality, in the physical body. In the physical body, when we see a disturbance of a normal function or the way tissue normally looks, when that is disturbed, that is what the medical profession calls a disease, which is in fact an imbalance in energy, and it's caused by compressing, in other words, putting more pressure on that system or less pressure. That's all it is. So there are two types of diseases: compression diseases and expansion diseases. That's all it is. Yeah. So once we know that, what are acute diseases? Acute diseases then are imbalances that occur spontaneously. Right. I've said your system has a limited movement in energy compression. So it can move, it can open up a bit, and it can close down a bit. That is very important, because if we weren't able to do that, we wouldn't survive a winter and we wouldn't survive a summer. We would just fall apart, disintegrate. So our system is able to close down a bit and it's able to open up a bit. And it does that spontaneously. Luckily, you don't have to know anything about this. No, it just happens. There's nothing you need to do about it. You automatically, your whole system rebalances and adjusts to it. So that's all it is. These imbalances, they appear spontaneously. If you wait a little bit, the system rebalances and they disappear. In physical terms, we may get signs that tell us that the pressure on the field, and therefore as a result of that, the manifestation within the matter is changing. We get signs. Allopathic medicine calls it symptoms. Yeah. If we get a cold feeling, that means that the energy balance inside our system is changing. It is compressing. When we get too hot, it is expanding. And very often what we see is when there is an acute imbalance going on, when we're in the process of, then we see these things happening one after the other. You have a fever, you feel very hot. The next minute, you're shivering, you're cold, then you get hot again, and you get cold again. What is this? This is your system trying to readjust, looking for the balance. Do you have to do something about it? No, you don't. It happens automatically. It is, in a way, I would say that it would be better not to call them diseases, not even acute diseases, not even call them acute imbalances. They're more like conditions. So when the balance is shifting to another as a result of conditions, outside and inside conditions and situations and circumstances, then you get a slight shift of balance and your system needs to readjust, sometimes just locally, and sometimes your whole system finds that it has to help move in and take part in the action. So the acute condition of change, we have an awareness of that. And that mainly happens, or our awareness mainly is in our body. We're not so much aware of changes in our, or slight imbalances in our mental system or our emotional system. We think they're normal because we rationally, we have excuses for them. But our body will make us aware of the change that is happening. And there are two different ways that we can become aware of these changes that are happening. One is a direct way. And in a direct awareness, we become aware of the changing pressure. Now, almost all diseases in our Western world are compression diseases. It's because there's too much pressure on the system. There are very few diseases that are expansion diseases. There can be acute situations of expansion. Of course there are, but we're far less aware of it. And you will understand why in acute situations we're far less aware of it. Because the first way of awareness is directly. That means we notice the pressure change directly. And where do we notice them mostly? We can notice them in our muscles through cramps, for instance. Yeah? Stiffness, which means that the muscle is too contracted, can't relax properly, can't expand properly. We can feel the direct pressure in nerves, twitching, itching, involuntary movements. All of that are signs of increased pressure that we become on the nervous system, that we become aware of in a direct way. The other way is indirectly. In other words, we haven't noticed, or we haven't consciously made contact with the direct pressure, and then we get a different signal. And that is via the response that our system automatically has on this changed condition. So an increased pressure on the system that we failed to see, and therefore we've failed to relax the system, to open it up, to expand it, the system will automatically try and rectify it, and it does that via inflammation. We talked about inflammation. Inflammation is the reaction in order to burn, to increase the temperature so that the tissues, the energies, are just becoming a little bit lighter, looser, and they expand. This inflammation is the readjustment, or is part of the readjustment that the body is already doing, or that the system is already doing, in order to rectify, to compensate, to adjust to the new balance. It is, in other words, a reaction to the change, which means it isn't the change itself. The change is not the expansion that inflammation tries to achieve. The change was compression. Therefore, inflammation is not a disease. Inflammation is not the imbalance. Inflammation is the reaction to the imbalance, which is very different, because that means that we do not have to respond, we do not have to treat inflammation. Also, it helps you to understand that the disease is the opposite to what you're experiencing. So you become aware of the imbalance through the system trying to rectify it. Now, there are basically two major influences to an imbalance. One comes from inside, and the other one is the outside. If it gets colder outside, then we contract, our system will contract in order to conserve heat and to put a barrier between the cold outside and the heat that is needed inside. But there's also an inside cause, because our system every day, every moment is different. It changes all the time. That means this change will also have a physical effect. When we are growing up, it's quite obvious. Yeah, children, from babies to toddlers and small children and so on, they change. They physically change, which means that the energy changes, and therefore the manifestation of the energy, the body changes. In physical terms, that means that some of the structures that are there need to be modified. Some broken down and completely redone, others just slightly modified. But that leaves debris, cellular debris. That cellular debris needs to be removed, recycled. So the energy balance is shifting now to a new balance, not to try and restore the old balance, to a new balance. So the old stuff needs to be moved away and cleared up. That is the cause of all childhood infections, for instance. Yeah, it's a spontaneous growing process. And having infections, remember, infections are inflammations plus bacteria, or as the medical profession wants to call it also, inflammation plus viruses. It doesn't matter. These infections, childhood infections, are in effect healing stages. The pressure on the child comes from inside. It's the growing pressure from inside that creates a different balance, and the system responds to that by clearing up whatever is left behind and it no longer needs. So any inflammation that we see also as an adult acute inflammation is a response to an increased pressure on the system. When we have that inflammation, which the medical profession calls an acute disease, which is actually the healing process of an acute change in balance in energy, we do not need to do anything about it. It's acute. You can wait and see what happens. Because, and doctors, well, whether doctors know, I don't know anymore, because their education is different now. They anyway, in the medical profession knows that if they leave acute diseases alone, 9 out of 10 times it will heal up completely without any intervention. Now, that means that you're just losing 9, 10, 90% of your income. Yeah? So their message is you have to respond very quickly because this could be dangerous. Most of the time, it heals up. When it doesn't, then you may enter a stage that we call chronic diseases. It's a chronic situation. It's a situation that goes on for a long period of time. We don't define long, yeah? But it's more than a day. It's more than a week. It can sometimes even be more than a month. A long time means it stays with you. Either that, or it's a situation that reoccurs quite often. The reoccurrence means that the body is, or the system is able to rectify the balance, but because the pressure remains, it shifts out of balance again. So the body, the system responds, puts it back, out again, puts it back, out again. You can imagine that as you are getting older, that your system can only keep doing this for a limited period of time. It's going to run out of energy to rectify that problem. So the energy imbalance in chronic situations, chronic diseases, chronic imbalances, the problem of the energy imbalance remains. Even if the symptoms disappear, the fact that it comes back by itself automatically means that the underlying problem is still there. And it's an underlying problem of too much pressure. Yeah? So trying to deal with the symptoms, pushing the symptoms back, making sure that it's less painful, that it's less swollen, that it's less hot, that doesn't change the fact that you have a problem. What you're doing is you are pushing back on the effort that the system is making to try and heal it. So you're interfering with the healing process, not with the problem. In order to deal with the problem, you need to take note of the inflammation that is causing these intermittent time periods. The inflammation tells you that your system is trying to heal an overpressure, and it's not quite succeeding in doing so. Now we may have to think about how can we help this? Yeah. So it's virtually always, it's an increased pressure on the energy field, which causes an increased pressure on the material field, which is your body or part of your body, certain systems within your body that are not functioning properly. It's an increased problem, too much pressure on it. That's the problem. How are we going to heal it? What would be wise in terms of interference? It would be wise to remove the cause. Never mind the symptoms. It doesn't matter how it is expressed. Once you know, once you've realized that too much pressure is the cause of your imbalance, your disease, then it doesn't matter whether you're at that time in an inflammation period, i.e. an attempt to heal your problem, because it's not going to work if it's a chronic problem, if it's been there for a long time and reoccurring quite often. You need to remove the cause. Remove the pressure on your energy field, on your system, on your life. That's what it means. You need to change your way of life. And that comes down to changing your habits, changing the structure of your life. And that may include relationships, places where you live, your work, your hobbies, all of that structure of life. And the third one is your beliefs, what you believe to be right, what you believe to be good. Because all of those could play a major role in creating that extra pressure continuously in your life. Those are the things that are necessary to look at if you really want to remove the cause of your problem. It's removing the pressures. Yeah. It may be that most of these manifestations of the pressure is in localized areas. Well, in that case, you may consider helping your system at the physical level, at the local level. And a help here is not fighting the inflammation, is not making life easier for yourself, because that way you keep the problem of overpressure in place. What you need to do in order to help your system is to stimulate, try and create as much energy as you can for the automatic healing response, the natural healing response that your system has in itself. So your system will know what to do to open the tissues up again. It will know what to do, but it needs to create inside pressure in order to push out the outside pressure that is leaning on the tissues, on the physical matter. So how do we do that? The various ways that you can help yourself in that way. One is you could put direct pressure on the tissues that are painful, that are inflamed, that are where you can feel the pressure. And if you start putting pressure on your body with your thumbs, with your fingers, just remember the places where it hurt the most are the places where the pressure is the highest, and where there is the greatest need to reduce that pressure. Don't be afraid. Just press wherever it hurts. Keep pressing it. On your back, get somebody else to press it. Or you can lie down on tennis ball or a piece of wood or whatever, just to get the pressure on those points. The pressure will create a response from the inside of your system. It will see, or it will view it as if the pressure is even increasing on the outside. So therefore the defense pressure has to go up. And that is what the system does. It creates more pressure inside in order to resist the pressure outside. You can also open up, because that's what you try to do, open up this system. Other way would be to use temperature. If you use heat on those chronic painful areas, you will open it up. But from the moment you take the heat away, the system will fall back on itself, and it will see that period of time that it's been warmed up as dangerous, because it's not normal. It's not what it wants to do. It's not what it's trying to do. So it crawls back, it coils back on itself, and it goes back a little further than where it was. So it's contracted even more. Then you put more heat on it for 15 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours, doesn't matter. The rest of the time you're without that extra stimulus, and the system will recoil even further. You can also use ice. If you put ice on the system will contract. That way, it will do the same as you would be doing with your thumbs and putting pressure on it. It will contract. So now it puts pressure on itself on the inner system. Now the tissues become under even more pressure, and the system reads it as dangerous, life-threatening. So the system gathers energy and pushes it back open again. What you can do is to use both. You can, for instance, do a 10 minutes ice, 10 minutes heat, 10 minutes ice, 10 minutes heat, and so on for a period of time. Always end up, the last one should be ice, not heat, because it should be contracting. So what you're doing there is massaging. By using temperature, you're massaging the deeper tissues into contracting, opening up, contracting, opening up, so they become looser that way. What else can you do? Any painful area, you can move. Don't keep it still, move it. But don't put too much pressure on it. Start moving it without pressure. So you move your joints without lifting weights or without standing up. But gentle movement, which is the active form of a massage. Yeah, massage is basically moving the tissues around, or moving the muscles and the tissues, done by another person. Here in the movement, you can do it yourself. When you concentrate on breathing, your whole torso can be moved from the inside. Slowly, slowly, because otherwise you frighten the tissues and it will just cramp up. So movement, breathing, slowly and without pressure. And then generally, whether it's a locally reoccurring problem, i.e. a chronic disease, as they call it, or it's a general one, it's important to try and look for challenges. It's important in your life. It's important to try and step out of your comfort zone in all aspects of life. Well, in the aspects of life that you're confronted with, that you can see, that you become aware of, that you're stuck in, contracted, you compress, you need to open up. So it's not about getting comfortable. It's about easing yourself out of the jail that you're in, out of the four walls that are cramping your style. You need to try and get out of that. You need to find ways of improving your life by making it more difficult for yourself, if you see what I mean. Yeah? You don't need to force things, but gentle things, little things in life, it's better to do it yourself than to have somebody else do it or let the machine do it. Just take more responsibility and stick with that. Because the comfort that they're selling us is putting more pressure on our system because of immobilization of mind and body. We need to move it if we want to get away from chronic diseases and chronic imbalances. So think about that. Acute diseases, wait. You don't need to do anything. If it turns into it, or if it becomes, or some other symptoms make you aware of a chronic condition, then you have to help the body in what it's trying to do. And that is to generate more pressure inside so that the natural healing process can rectify the problem on the outside. And that is the essence of how you approach chronic diseases.
So I want to run over quite a few of them things just out of clarification, and I've got a few observations and questions. So again, for people who are watching this tonight, you can go back to the 4-part seminar where Patrick talks about this. But I want to just, you've gone through it there, but I just want to verify again. Acute healing crisis, chronic illness. So we've got movement, temperature, and pressure. So an acute is kind of no movement, rest. Decrease the pressure. So you go to bed and rest. So you've got life pressure, physical pressure. And if the temperature's raised, just allow that and encourages that to stay raised. And whereas chronic, if something's stuck, you want to encourage movement, obviously not beyond what you can endure, but you want to encourage movement. You want to try and increase the pressure because obviously it's stuck. And you want to even stimulate the temperature by even contracting it first with ice. Then the opposite effect will of that to be open up. Or you could do ice, rotate with heat, which will create a lot of circulation and movement there. So is it really that simple as that, really, with acute, the opposite effects?
Yes, it is that simple because you only have two types of diseases. Either the problem is a contracting and continuously ongoing contracting problem, which means that you continuously, bit by bit, slowly, you need to open it up, or you have an expansion disease in which you need to do everything the opposite way to contract it. You need to hem it in. But just concentrate on too much pressure, because that is basically what we're suffering from at this stage of human development and in this part of the world particularly. So the fact that you do it yourself, that has a few characteristics to it. One is you need to focus on going beyond where you normally would stop, where you've learned to stop. Yeah, this hurts, don't use it. Okay, that's okay for an acute situation. But if it hurts for 20 years, then you're only going to get it to move better by moving it. So you need to move it. But when you do it, you know when to, how much pressure you can stand, and so on and so forth. And don't think that if you are going to move, exercise, people call it, I call it movement, an awful lot during the day, and that you have to do that every day. Yeah? Say every half an hour, I have to move my thumb for 5 minutes or whatever, then that is going to speed up the healing process, if you think that that's going to speed up the healing process, if you think that it's going to shorten your recovery period, you are mistaken. Because the body can only go, or the system can only go as fast as it can, as and when it can generate the energy that it can spare to go to that healing. Yeah. So there's no point in pushing it. It is going to take a long time, and you're going to go through phases without actually knowing what's happening to you. There will be phases where you think, oh my God, now it's 10 times worse. Just wait, carry on doing what you're doing. It may be that you need to take a little break. Why? Because I can't stand the movement or the pressure or the ice or whatever it is that you're using, and you take a little break. But then you move on. You do the same thing again. You have to be patient, because the natural healing process is something that happens in balance, which means that the rest of the body, don't forget, we're talking chronic. So it's a long period of time that this imbalance has been shifting. In order to rectify that, you're going to need a lot of time and a lot of stages to go through. Just trust the process. Your system knows how to heal it properly, without doing any damage to any other system. Yeah, which is something that no doctor can do for you, because they can only look at one particular part that is, in their eyes, their opinion, in their way of looking at things. This is what is going wrong. It should be doing that, so we're forcing it to do that. And therefore, you unbalance the system even further, or in different places. The natural healing system heals in balance. It takes its time, because you're not dying from this, you're getting better. It may feel to you that it will take too long, but it never takes too long. It takes the time that it takes.
Yeah, I know. Basically, you can simplify it again even more. Acute illness, do nothing. And the only time you intervene is chronic illness. So we've got the movement, the pressure, the temperature, and when to intervene and when not to intervene. And within those boundaries, you've got most of the tools really to deal with things on your own.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And a few people say to me, sorry, quickly, that what's the quickest way to get through this inflammation? And I don't know. I don't know your body.
No.
Go to bed and then see what your body tells you.
Yeah. And the crucial thing is that you're in charge. Your system is in charge. So you need to submit to the natural way things are.
Yeah. So something else you've mentioned before, like you say, there's not a lot of expansive illnesses, but you've mentioned in the tissue, if tissues are weak and soft, prone to infection, that's probably a sign of an expansive illness. If tissues are becoming hard, which we say tumors, we say a cancer, then that's a lot of lice pressure. So even your tissue can give you a manifestation, an idea of where, even though you said expansive illnesses are quite rare, but your tissue will also manifest that as well.
Yeah, the tissue within its boundaries, within its limitations, can move up and down. So they can expand and they can contract. But the disease, the problem is almost always, it's too much pressure. Chronic problem is too much pressure. And the tissues, they will, in the first instance, contract under the pressure, like we do during the winter. We just contract. You see people walking around like that, because it's cold. We gotta hold it all together. That is perfectly normal. And then the system will readjust over time and the tissues will open up a little bit. So they can do whatever. You don't need to look for chronic problems. You don't need to look at what the tissues are doing. Whether your hip hurts more or less is irrelevant. Once you know that the problem is too much pressure on a particular part of aspect of my life, then that is where I should put my attention. No longer to the hip, no longer to, is it better for today? Are you feeling better today? Oh, that's good, isn't it? Oh, you're feeling worse today. That's bad. Makes no difference. Good or bad makes no difference to nature. It's which way are you going? Are you continuing to contract and compress the life out of your tissues, or are you on the way to open it up and create more and more and more life? And then you have to, once you're on the right track, you just have to carry on what you're doing, open your life up, change it, make fundamental changes, and you just continue doing that, irrespective of how you feel.
There's another something we've never mentioned before. In the book we wrote, The Conscious Humanity, we touched on this, but we didn't bring it into this area. So I'm going to try this tonight. So I'm going to throw this one on you. I realized the connection between, should we say, importance and stress. So the more important something is, the more potential stress it can cause you. And when you've got diseases of contraction, pressure, or when you've got the rare diseases of no pressure, do you think there's a connection in the person there where there's too much importance put on? We're actually creating our own pressure in some ways. And there are some people that you could say have a little bit nihilistic. They don't have any meaning in life. So you've got, on one aspect, some people haven't found a meaning in life, whether in the whole universal sense or on a personal sense. And some people have almost put too much meaning on life and brought on too much pressures.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a connection between meaning and nihilism and those two states of being?
Yes, I think if you see life as meaningful, it means something, it has a purpose, it goes somewhere, that gives value to it. If it doesn't, if something has no meaning, it has no value. Yeah. The value is personal, so nobody can give it to you. You either give meaning to your life or you don't. Whether giving importance, putting emphasis on importance, well, the emphasis on importance in this case, when we're talking about chronic diseases or in general health, the importance should be that it's your task, that it's your responsibility to try and keep yourself healthy. You do not need to read books. You do not need to listen to anybody talking. You don't need to go and get anybody's advice or experts' advice. You just need to see what your own system is telling you. So the importance is the awareness that it's my responsibility. In chronic diseases, what is important is to realize that it's caused by too much pressure in my life. And I'm the only one that can do anything about it. I have to set the wheels in motion. Once that realization is there, once you've made the decision that you are going to look for ways of changing your life and doing something about that extra pressure, then you need to relax, because your achievement should not be under any pressure. you are not responsible, directly responsible for the achievement, for the outcome of your actions. Yeah, you take action. First of all, you make a decision. You take a personal stand on things, on your life. Then you take action. You know, okay, I need to get going. I need to move out of my comfort zone. I need to deal with the extra pressures in my life. I need to get them away from me. And I'm going to do that bit by bit. It's not the case that if you remove one major stress factor or pressure factor in your life, then all of a sudden your symptoms will disappear and you'll be healthy. No, because it's a chronic state. It isn't about one thing. It's about lots of little things all piled on top of one another. So you shouldn't look at the result of your actions. You should just look at your actions. So the stress is the period of time between not knowing what the reason is for the way that I am or that my life functions, to the point of knowing what it is. Once I know, the stress should disappear, and you go, okay, then I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. What the outcome of my actions are, not important. I just keep doing it, keep doing it. My system will let me know how far we got.
Yeah, so it's always know what your life balance is and focus on that, and the results of that are the results.
Yeah.
And if you always return to that balance, then eventually you'll see positive physical results, but the focus should always be on the action rather than on the result.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
the journey.
Just I know, yeah, and I know you've mentioned on these, I know the virtual law will talk about pressure, but these rare occurrences of illnesses of lack of pressure, that maybe that person needs to climb a mountain. And if that person hasn't got a meaning to them life, maybe they can just give themselves a meaning. I need to climb this mountain, and maybe a meaning will come out of that.
Yeah, it's we're not going to go into too much of that because it will keep too many people busy for too long, and it's irrelevant to virtually everybody. But essentially, expansion diseases need to be brought down to earth, if you like. You know, they're floating up in the air. They're not connected to the reality of their lives, and I mean nature, natural lives. So there's the word. You know, what should you be doing? Get stuck into nature. Climbing a mountain is you get confronted with the nature and the natural environment and the climate and so on and so forth, the weather. But other ways, just go and work on a farm or create your own farm. Get your hands stuck in the earth. Get busy with nature, and that will bring you down.
Yeah. So another you mentioned then earlier was the childhood development illnesses. Now, obviously, comparing a child to an adult, they're going to go through lots of stages, until probably they're 18. As adults, stages in life kind of last a little bit longer, growth's maybe a bit of slower. But obviously, a child from conception even to 18, there's lots of stages and growth stages. One that's an interesting one, on which people always say, I'm going to send my child to the nursery. What can I do to build up his immune system? Because he's going to be confronted with all these bugs. Now, we've gone through that the bugs aren't the problem. The problem is this is a new phase in this child's life that may not be ready for. And I always try to say to people that at 3, 2, even 2 years old, 3, 4, 5 years old, mother and baby toddler groups are better than dumping them at the nursery. It's a nice, gentler path where they can learn a bit of independence with mother around. because what's I believe is happening when they're coming from these nurseries, it's a bit of a shock, and all the colds that they're getting are some way trying to cope and a response to this new life that has been quite a sharp change rather than a mother toddler group and then a nursery.
Yeah, we can put it quite simply, right? Being at the early stages of your life, toddlers, yeah, that is difficult enough because you need to find your feet in life. So you need to learn an awful lot. You need to readjust an awful lot. That's a hard job. There's a lot of pressure involved. Why should you then want to add pressure to it by removing the one stable thing that this toddler can rely on, which is mum, if you like, parents in general? You know, if you remove those while they are pressurized into trying their own feet or finding their own feet in life, you just add an awful lot of stress and pressure to their system. So they're likely to get ill. So the answer to your question, how do I, or what can I do to strengthen the immune system of my toddler when it goes to the crash, when it goes, when it's pushed away from me, is don't do it. Keep your toddler at home. That's the best way you can support his immune system.
Yeah, we've always socialized our kids when they were younger with us around, so there was never a stress, never a trauma.
Yeah.
And they're quite sociable. Alex, you know, he's quite happy-go-lucky. The first 5 years, he was very reserved, and so it was good that we were always around. And now, people who know him now wouldn't think he was a very quiet, reserved child at 4 and 5.
Yeah.
That's struggling to mix. But he grew through that with us.
Yeah, but if you have a child which is anxious about the new world that it's going to meet, and everything is a bit frightening to that child, if you dump that child somewhere, it's going to retreat further away from the world because the world is too upsetting, it's too frightening for the child. The only way that you can give that child a chance of entering the adult world as a proper independent individual is by holding its hand. And some children only want their hand held until they're 2, and others until they're 12, and whatever. It doesn't make any difference. It's about what your child, the nature of your child requires. You know? That is what is important. And that is how you make very young children ill, diseased.
Yeah, and again, we're going to nudge into politics a little bit. There was school near us years ago so you're talking 5 to 11-year-olds, primary school, and they stopped allowing parents in the morning with the children and at the end of the day. So they created a real barrier from that's your school, this is the parents. So whereas some parents would arrive early, escort the children into the class, it'd be all sociable, they might chat with the children, but they created clear boundaries. And this only traumatizing the children. And on another level, we've all been uneducated. This is why I think these chats are important. I was uneducated once. I'm trying to learn. When you don't understand this stuff and nobody's explaining this stuff, you see your child come home with a headache, with a cold, anxious. And again, I know parents who still do it. They give these Calpol liquids. And for me, that's slightly innocuous. Oh, it's only Calpol. But when they're having this all the time, not only is it they're not in allowing this inflammatory process, so you've got the physical waste, they're not allowing them really to deal emotionally with what's happening because it's all being seen as a physical illness And that's why I'm really passionate about this, that something I didn't understand with my first child was the emotional side of a child's growth. And because I've self-taught this, and with you, and I've learned this, this is why I'm passionate about this particular part of life, because I've used this with my own children. But I can see a lot of parents, not out of doing anything bad, they just see the child struggling, pain, Calpol, but they're not really helping. And in fact, they're building up a lot more physical and emotional problems with this. This one little sachet of Calpol does a lot of damage, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's also about, you know, the sidetrack is more important than what we're focusing on. What are the parents trying to do? Make it as comfortable as possible for their children. So any pain, it's got to go. Any discomfort, you know, get the doctor to do something about it, whatever. But what that does is that for the parents, it removes their possibility of actually becoming aware of something, because they're removing the signs. Therefore, they can no longer see what is causing those signs. And for the children, of course, they grow up with the idea that life should only be led in a comfort zone. If you're uncomfortable, do something about it. You know, if you're uncomfortable with having breasts, remove them. Yeah. And that is how we create the basic problems that our current society is in. It's been half a century, say. Yeah, it's been more than that, but certainly the last half century has been very important in speeding all this up. And the current population is almost ready to be led into the corral and locked away and just be told what to do, because we've not taken the opportunities that nature gives us and gives every living organism to learn. We look beyond it. We say we don't want to learn this. We don't want to know what inflammation does and how it evolves. Stop it. Throw it away. And we do this with an awful lot of other things too. And so it's having a generation that is now raising their own kids in that manner. So these kids will do that by themselves later on. That'll be an easy job for the government or anybody who wants to rule the world.
Yeah, because I'm very confident that our three kids, because it's become their reality, they don't second guess if they're feeling tired, they just go to bed. I don't envisage any time in their life that they won't be able to cope with an acute healing crisis, because they know what to do, because they've lived it. It's part of their whole being now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with this education you're doing in the chronic, because as we grow up and life pressures, family work, all these pressures of the system, no matter how much knowledge you are, it doesn't make you immune to illness.
No.
But it's knowing what to do when that comes along. And I'm confident my kids will know, because they've been pushed, you know, through the comfort zones, and they've learned how to deal with it and thought, well, that wasn't very difficult.
Yeah.
So they've gone through that and believed that, and it's come part of their being. And one thing I know what biggest fear is, and I think this is a manufactured fear, and I hope you'll put this straight now, then the system, people, doctors say, oh, your child might get sepsis, your child might get meningitis. And these are just not things that you just catch. You don't just get sepsis, you don't just get meningitis. There's a whole process there that happens in between. And if you understand the process, especially the acute healing crisis, you can pretty much avoid everything there by doing the right thing in the initial event. And so all this fear about sepsis, and especially sepsis and meningitis, it's something, in my opinion, that can be quite easily avoided.
Well, these things, these fears that the medical profession is always putting on the table, of course, they're not lying. Yeah, these things can happen. But what they don't know, because they've failed to examine it and they failed to look at it, is that it only happens in certain circumstances. And the circumstances are if the system is unable to heal a certain part of your body, so a specific location, by heating it up and eating away the debris, then it will ask energy, or will pull energy from other parts of the body, so of the system. So the whole system is now engaged in trying to heal this. If that doesn't work, in other words, if you're not physically ill, spontaneously fasting, doesn't want to eat, headache, sweating, just wanting to go to bed, if that doesn't work, then what the system does is it encapsulates the problem. And the problem is pushed aside into a corner so that we can function around it. If you keep doing that, and you have several of these areas that are never healed, they've never been healed because they never got the opportunity. And then something else happens somewhere else, which asks for a lot of energy and some more energy. It may then well be that a lot of energy is going through there, and that the energy that is needed to hold this bit unhealed problem in place is not enough. So this breaks open, and now you're in big trouble. But if you are continuing to live and allowing things to heal up as they occur, then there is no risk of you ever getting sepsis from a local infection, whatever that local infection is. Never. Because your system is able to draw energy away from other areas without there being any danger to that area. So it's an accumulation of bad behavior, of an approach to health or healing that is opposite to what it should be. Yeah? Putting things away in cupboards, pretending that once it's hidden away behind a door, that it doesn't exist, is not going to help the function in your house. Because now everything behind the door, all those spaces will be filled with rubbish. And eventually it will fall out, it will stand in the way, and you will get ill seriously.
Yeah, I think what I've learned, especially like you've mentioned there, if you go through these acute healing crises and you get success, then all this other stuff is avoidable. All this other stuff is avoidable. Yeah. If you always have a focus on your life balance, and I know you've always said ever since I've met you, always think in terms of energy. And it takes a while to understand what you mean by that. But when we talk about movement, pressure, temperature, life balance, these are all energetic things. Your life balance, as you understand your life, not the physical things you're doing, but your life balance is an energetic thing. You can actually get to know in your mind, what is my life balance? So these are all energetic things. And it does take a while for anyone who's listening, but when you start to think of pressure, temperature, life balance, movement, as energetic things, you have a breakthrough moment and you start to glimpse things that actually there's very little danger out there for us. That's, apart from really concentrated extreme poisoning, getting run over by a bus, 98% of life's things that happen to us will bring on an acute illness, well, acute healing crisis. We go to bed. We don't need to really have much knowledge or doing anything. And it's just a normal part of life. It's, life will hurt now and again. It's unavoidable.
Yeah. The only real knowledge you need to have is, who am I? What are my real needs in life? That is what you should learn as you are getting older, and that is what you should focus on. And all the rest, you don't have to be afraid. Just let it go.
Yeah. I think fear for me is the biggest thing, because when I walked away many, many years ago from the medical profession, when you haven't got the knowledge, you're in a void. Kind of know that I don't want that because that's not doing me any good. And we may mention this in another conversation, but you dive into alternative health practices, therapies, you dive into from one thing that you know isn't good to something else as kind of an aid. And then when you push through that and you keep going, you realize actually, there's very little I need really exterior to myself. And that it does take time. So anyone listen, you have to go through fear, that barrier of fear and this void of lack of knowledge, but you have to keep with it. And there is a lot of light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. And the way to hold on to that thought and that action is never be afraid of the future. It doesn't matter. Dying is nothing to be afraid of. Being incapacitated is nothing to be afraid of, because either you find a way, and that way you've learned, you find a way to continue, or you don't. And if you don't, you die. It doesn't matter. Life is nothing that you need to achieve. You just need to enjoy the journey. Never mind where you end up or how you end up. Because ultimately, it will be, if you like, a box in the ground. Although there are, of course, other ways of losing your life, but just as a matter of speaking.
Yeah, it will come to, regardless of what we do, it will come to an end.
Yeah.
So we may as well let go of the fear. And I think later on, we are going to have a conversation about the purpose of death as well, and a bit more looking into that and mentally in stages of life and preparing for death. So I think we're running out of time now. So we'll leave that there this week, and we'll see what we come up with next week anyway.
Okay, that would be great. See you next week, Rob.
Yeah. Yeah.